The swamp lurks. A look at lobbying's dark side. Political lobbying. It's like that weird smell in your attic. You know it's there, you know it's probably not great, but you really don't want to look too closely. In theory, it's citizens petitioning their government, making their voices heard. In practice, it's more like a David and Goliath situation. Except Goliath is wearing a $5,000 suit, has a direct line to your senator, and David is stuck trying to get his rusty slingshot through airport security. So buckle up, because we're diving headfirst into the murky swamp of political lobbying, where we'll expose the hidden agendas, the backroom deals, and the uncomfortable truth about who really calls the shots in the supposed halls of power. Follow the money when corporations bankroll legislation. Let's start with the obvious: money talks. And in the world of political lobbying, it screams like a heavy metal concert at a retirement home. Corporations in oil, pharmaceuticals and finance spend more on influencing politicians than some small country's GDP. Isn't that just capitalism at work? Not entirely wrong, but when industries spend billions lobbying, guess who foots the bill? Spoiler alert, it's us. Take the pharmaceutical industry. They've spent billions lobbying against drug price regulations. This isn't just about money, it's about power. Democracy on the auction block. How lobbying undermines public trust. Remember that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you think about democracy? Yeah, lobbying is like pouring a bucket of ice water on that feeling. Because when lobbyists hold more sway than voters, it erodes the very foundation of our democratic systems. Imagine this. You're at an auction, but instead of bidding on a priceless artifact, it's your elected officials up for grabs. And guess who has the deepest pockets? That's right. The same corporations and special interest groups we talked about earlier. They get to whisper in the ears of lawmakers, draft legislation that benefits their bottom line, and ensure that their interests are prioritized over the needs of ordinary citizens. This creates a vicious cycle of cynicism and apathy. This is how democracy dies, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Manufacturing consent, the art of astroturfing and public manipulation. Let's talk about astroturfing, the practice of creating fake grassroots movements to manipulate public opinion. It's like those perfectly manicured lawns that look real from a distance, but are actually just plastic. Imagine this: a new bill is proposed that would benefit a particular industry, let's say relaxing environmental regulations for coal companies. Now, most people wouldn't be too thrilled about dirtier air and water, so how do you drum up support for such an unpopular policy? Enter the astroturfers. They create seemingly independent organizations with names like Citizens for Energy Independence or Americans for Affordable Energy. The goal is to create the illusion of widespread public support, to make it seem like everyday people are clamoring for this policy change. Let's talk about something most of us hold dear: our health. Specifically, how the healthcare industry, fueled by lobbying dollars, has turned something that should be a right into a luxury few can afford. Picture this. You're at the pharmacy, staring at the price of your life-saving medication, and wondering if you should skip meals for a month or just try your luck with a shaman and some healing crystals. Sound familiar? That's the reality for millions of Americans, thanks to the pharmaceutical industry's relentless lobbying efforts. They've spent billions ensuring that drug prices remain sky high, all while claiming to champion innovation and patient care. It's a system designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many, and it's a stark reminder that when it comes to healthcare, lobbying has real-life consequences. Deregulation? It sounds boring, technical, like something you'd only discuss in a windowless room with fluorescent lighting. But don't let the bland name fool you, because deregulation is often a recipe for disaster, cooked up by corporations and served to the public with a side of empty promises. Imagine this. You're at a restaurant and the waiter informs you that they've decided to deregulate the kitchen. No more pesky health codes, no more inspections, just pure, unadulterated culinary freedom. Appetizing, right? Of course not. Because we all understand that regulations exist for a reason, to protect us from harm. Yet when it comes to industries like banking, energy and telecommunications, Lobbyists have successfully convinced lawmakers that less regulation is always better, that it will unleash economic growth and prosperity for all. Deregulation often leads to corporate abuse, environmental damage, and even financial crises. So far, we've focused on domestic lobbying, but the game gets even shadier when foreign governments and interests get involved. Because now we're not just talking about influencing domestic policy, we're talking about shaping global events, often with little regard for transparency or accountability. Imagine this, you're watching a puppet show, but instead of colourful felt characters, it's world leaders on stage, and the puppeteers pulling the strings are foreign lobbyists, working behind the scenes to advance the interests of their clients. These clients can be foreign governments looking to secure lucrative arms deals, multinational corporations seeking favourable trade agreements, or even authoritarian regimes trying to whitewash their human rights records on the international stage. This type of foreign lobbying can have far-reaching consequences, from influencing military interventions to shaping trade policies that benefit certain countries at the expense of others. We like to imagine our elected officials as well-informed policy wonks, carefully considering all sides of an issue before making decisions. But the reality is often far less glamorous, and that's where lobbyists step in, armed with briefcases full of expertise and a knack for simplifying complex issues. Imagine this. You're a lawmaker, tasked with crafting legislation on cybersecurity or pharmaceutical regulations. Enter the lobbyists. They arrive with teams of experts, ready to provide you with information, conveniently framed to support their clients' interests. This creates an uneven playing field, where well-funded interests dominate policymaking. Chapter 8. The Watchdogs Defanged. Lobbying's assault on regulation and enforcement. Regulatory agencies act as watchdogs, protecting the public from corporate malfeasance and safeguarding our health, safety, and environment. But what happens when the watchdogs are compromised by the entities they're supposed to oversee? Lobbying efforts target regulatory agencies, weakening them through budget cuts and industry-friendly appointees. They influence regulations to make them toothless and ineffective. It's regulatory capture where the regulated become the regulators, leaving the public vulnerable. Chapter 9. Profiteering from War. The military-industrial complex and the lobbying machine. War is a terrible thing. It brings death, destruction, and unimaginable suffering. But for some, war is also big business. A chance to rake in massive profits by supplying weapons, ammunition, and other military equipment. And where there's money to be made, you can bet your bottom dollar that lobbyists won't be far behind. Defense contractors spend billions lobbying for increased military spending, often justifying it with inflated threats and fear-mongering. But the real beneficiaries of this system are not the American people, but the shareholders and executives of these defense corporations who profit handsomely from war and conflict, regardless of the human cost. Chapter 10. Our Planet Up for Grabs: How Lobbying Fuels Environmental Destruction. We only have one planet, it's the only home we've ever known, and it's facing an unprecedented environmental crisis, from climate change to deforestation to pollution. Yet, despite the overwhelming scientific consensus and the very real threat to our planet's future, powerful industries continue to prioritize profit over the environment, aided and abetted by an army of lobbyists. Imagine this. You're at a doctor's appointment and the physician informs you that your patient, the Earth, is gravely ill. The diagnosis is bleak rising temperatures, polluted air and water, and a rapidly deteriorating ecosystem. The doctor recommends immediate and drastic action to save the patient's life. But then a group of lobbyists representing the fossil fuel industry, the logging companies and the mining corporations barge into the room armed with charts, graphs and dubious studies, claiming that the patient is perfectly fine. Ultra-reclaiming our democracy, fighting back against the influence of lobbying. So there you have it. A glimpse into the shadowy world of political lobbying where money talks, influence peddling is the name of the game, and the public interest often takes a back seat to corporate greed and hidden agendas. But it's not all doom and gloom. We need to demand greater transparency in lobbying activities, stricter regulations on campaign finance, and a renewed commitment to putting the public good ahead of private profit. Because the future of our democracy, our planet, and our very way of life depends on it.